Shall we do a sleepy podcast this time round?
A sleepy podcast?
Yeah, because it's very hot, and also we've played too many trick-taking games yesterday.
What does a sleepy podcast involve?
Well, just mostly being a board game podcast, but a little sleepy, you know? That was very good.
We could use that as a sting.
Okay, noted.
In between all the...
Oh, wait, I'm not in control. You're editing the podcast. I can't make you do this. Elaine... Use yourself yawning as a sting from now on.
I was going to do zzz as well, but that just sounds like a beat. It was supposed to be like Zeds for snoring, like sleep.
Nice, yeah.
Why do you use Zeds for sleep?
I don't know. If anyone knows, please write in. Elaine@nopunincluded.com and tell us why they use Zeds for sleep.
Welcome to Talk Cardboard, a podcast about board games and everything adjacent with me, Elaine, and you.
Wow, that was not sleepy energy at all. That was energetic. It woke me up. It jolted me right into board game territory. I'm Efka.
That was a really long name.
Yeah, it was. Please address me as that from now on.
I'm not going to remember all that because I'm too asleep. On today's show, we'll be laughing at your failings in Schadenfreude, working a dystopian gig economy in Freelancers, and moving sheep around a nonsense map of New Zealand in Great Western Trail, as well as an interview with Kieron Gillen, a comic book author.
And now role-playing game designer.
First, we've had an email from Joseph regarding an announcement we made in the last episode. They say, "Thanks for another Banger Talk Cardboard episode. I appreciate your policy that you will not be accepting games from publishers without your express purchase. This is very fair and exemplary in light of current issues of abused trust in the industry. Transparency and honest choices set a good and effective example of best practices that serve to maintain and build trust and truth in media as well as commercial integrity. However, while I was considering the varied implications of your decision, something occurred to me. I will explain. You have an ownership of a collection which will not be increased unless you opt to purchase more items of your choosing, which will validate your interest as not compromised. This is valid. Now consider the following question. How will this affect how you may be able to accept gifts of games and such from family, loved ones and close friends who, likely as not, would like to give you such items?"
Well, the new regulations do not prevent us from accepting gifts from family and loved ones, as long as they're not publishers or a brand, basically. So I can accept freely anything I want. It's just that if it's a brand, I have to then label the whole thing as ad, which is very inconvenient. And also, yeah, I don't know. I think some people also worryingly express that, like, oh, if you won't be accepting review copies, will that limit how many options you have for reviewing? And the answer to that is no, because we've mostly been buying our own games for a while now anyway. We did used to get some review copies, and some are still trickling in from arrangements made previously, our decision basically. So, it will level things out. And another thing I kind of like to mention, I think our decision to not accept review copies is the same decision as deciding to continue accepting review copies. One isn't somehow nobler or better than the other. It's just something that suits our channel and falling in line with regulations, you know. I definitely agree that there needs to be more oversight in how people are being marketed to, because, you know, marketing can be a very insidious thing. It can be a good thing as well. But currently, if you want my opinion on the way that UK regulatory bodies are going about it, I don't think they're doing it very well, because I think this whole thing created more confusion and more unnecessary kind of blanket labeling of everything that doesn't really clarify the picture to the end user, as you explained in the previous episode. So, you know, it's just a decision. There's nothing particularly noble or good about it. It's just something that makes sense to us. And is kind of difficult for us as well because, you know, financially it is going to be a little bit more restraining. But to once again reiterate, the actual answer to your question is it will not affect friends and family giving things to us, because friends and family can still give things to us as long as they don't represent the brand of the thing that is we're then talking about. So I don't have any immediate family members publishing board games right now. I have a couple of friends who are in the board game publishing industry, but they don't tend to give me things anyway, so not really an issue. On the subject of announcements, you might be noticing that this episode went out on Monday rather than on Friday. And just in case you missed us saying this everywhere else, Talk Cardboard now goes out on Mondays, because the deal is that there will be a new NPI thing every Monday. On one Monday, it will be a video on youtube.com/no pun included. And on another Monday, it will be Talk Cardboard, this podcast you're listening to right now. So new date for all NPI things is Monday. And if you like this podcast and want more of it, there's bonus episodes coming out to Patreon subscribers, patreon.com/no pun included, where also they'll get the episodes early. And with this change, even a couple of days earlier on a dedicated feed where you get the main episodes, bonus episodes, everything together. If you want more Talk Cardboard, patreon.com/no pun included.
First up, we have Schadenfreude, which comes from publisher Studio Turbine by designer CTR with an uncredited artist.
Ooh,
That
exciting.
seems to be a common thing at the moment.
Mystery artists.
Yeah, mystery artists.
Well, so this is... How do I preface this? Because I'm going to gush. I don't know if you're going to gush. I'm going to gush. And as soon as this preface ends, there will be so much gushing. But there's also a disclaimer, and that disclaimer is that it's going to be very hard for you to get your hands on this game. So Schadenfreude is a trick-taking game, but it's, as many trick-taking games these days, it's published in Japan and in small print runs, and getting it over here, it can be tricky and expensive. There are various ways of doing it. There are importing websites that import little games. I know there's one in US and one in UK, or you can also use a mail forwarding option. There's various ways, but this is one of the best trick-taking games I've ever played. It is so good. It is so phenomenally good. I'm absolutely smitten and in love. And if you're not familiar with trick-taking games, Elaine, do you want to explain them, or shall I do the explanation? Okay, all right, okay. So trick-taking games are card games. You might be familiar with some that you used to play with your grandpa or grandma or whatever in the olden days. You might be familiar with them because you've played Hearts on Windows 95, which is a trick-taking game. You might be familiar with them because you played, in bridge clubs, because bridge is a trick-taking game, or euchre, or schnapsen, or durak, or any number of other various regional classic trick-taking games that can be played with a 52-card deck. But now there's this explosion, this new boom, this whole zeitgeist, this movement. Trick-taking games are re-emerging. Did you know, Elaine? I've told you this 1,000 times, so you do know, but that just for the audience. Did you know it's the oldest genre of card game in the world?
Wow, this is brand new information to me.
Do you know that it's responsible for concepts like suits and jokers and stuff like
This
that?
is brand new information to me.
I've been saying it for a while. It's cool. So
It is cool though.
yeah, it is, right? So the idea of trick-taking games is that as opposed to climbing and shedding games, which are offshoots of trick-taking games or variations, it's hard to know what came first or later. I'm sure some historians are going to correct me here, but the idea is that you play a card of a suit. So let's say I play a spade, and then the other players usually must play also a spade. Well, they might want to play a higher spade, or they might want to play a lower spade. Depends in this game whether you want to win the trick or not. But the idea is that every player in sequence plays one card. They usually have to follow suit. So if someone played a spade, they also have to play a spade if they have one, right? So, and then whoever has the highest card or sometimes the lowest card or whatever, they win the trick. And that's good or bad depending on the game, right? So Schadenfreude says, okay, but what if it's everything, right? Like, what if it is like everything? So in Schadenfreude, you don't have the standard 52-card deck. You have a modified deck. There are 4 suits. They're in colors. There's yellow, red, green, blue, right? And then there's a special color, black, which just has 2 cards in it. But the cards range from -3 and
numbers
then
in it.
yeah, and -2, then -1, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right?
Except the black one that only has a 0 and a 10.
Yes, right? And so it then plays pretty much like a standard trick-taking game. But then some weird things happen, right? So first of all, the person that wins the trick is the person who played the second highest card on suit. So you don't want to play the highest card. You want to play the one that's just below the highest card. And that creates a weird wrinkle because sometimes in trick-taking games, it's easy to know whether you're going to win a trick. So, for example, if let's say 9 is the highest card in the suit, right? You play a 9, you know you're going to win this, unless someone plays trump or whatever, but like good guarantee. Here, a 9 guarantees that you lose the trick, right? Which is maybe good and or bad. You don't know. Why? Well, because here's the thing. You play to 40 points, right? But the winner of the game isn't the person who goes past 40 points. It's the person who lands exactly on 40 points. If anyone goes past 40 points, they immediately lose. And then the person who has the highest score...
Below 40 points.
Below 40, yeah. Or maybe also exactly on 40, who knows, right? They win. And that's, again, such a weird concept. It's... What it creates in the game is this sensation of like, I want to be high, but maybe I don't want to be the highest, because people can then force you to score points and bust out of the game. So that's a wrinkle. And then the third wrinkle, which is, I think, my favorite and the funniest one, and what makes Schadenfreude... I know I'm belaboring this explanation, but it's such a breezy, light, stupid, fun game that is excellent with a couple of beers or other kinds of non-alcoholic beverages, if you prefer. Just, anything that's relaxing, silly, and fun, because it's a smart game. It's a thinky game, but stupid things happen in it that are funny. And that's mostly derived from the scoring. So when you win the trick, the card that you won the trick with will go into your scoring pile. All other cards are just discarded. They don't matter, right? So it's the card that won you the trick. And let's say I won the trick with a 5, right? So that 5 goes in my scoring area. No other cards go into my scoring area unless someone played offsuit cards, in which case, let's say I led with a 5 blue, Elaine plays a 6 blue, and then Colin plays 3 red, right? So in this case, I had the second highest because Elaine played a 6, I played a 5, right? Colin's doesn't even count because it's offsuit, right? But because he played offsuit, that also goes in my scoring area. So I just scored 5 points and then 3 points. Those 2 cards are in my scoring area. If at any point I also get another 5 in that scoring area, the universe implodes and they cancel each other out and they disappear from my scoring area. So instead of having 13 points now, I just have 3, right? Which is such a weird concept to get your head around. But then when you start navigating it and you realize you can force people to win tricks...
That they don't want to win because it will cancel out something they've already got.
Yeah, or just sneakily sneak in a -3, right? Or you win the trick somehow. Well, not somehow. It's not that high. You can win a trick with a -3, right? And you already have a -3 in your scoring pile. So suddenly you've just gained yourself effectively.
Well, you've cancelled out the 3. Yeah, the
-3s. Yeah. Or maybe you want to dunk a -3 into your scoring pile because you want to start losing. Oh my God. It's just raucous, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, my inner old man really liked this game a lot. For the reasons that you've said. Like, it's a breezy game, but it seems quite serious. But then it devolves into daftness because of the scoring and because you suddenly realise you're about to win a trick. and cancel out half your score. And you're like, yeah.
But then you realize that maybe that's good.
But then you realise maybe that's good because maybe you don't want to score those points. But yeah, having people round, having something nice to eat or drink with it, I think it's perfect for that.
Right? Yeah. I guess you need to have people who are at least a little bit familiar with trick-taking games, because it plays like the most bog standard one, but that scoring system can be kind of tricky to get your head around.
My grandma would have trounced us all on this game.
Yeah?
Yeah, she was good at cards. Yeah, she was good at cards. I think she would have got her head around this immediately because she liked card games. And just wiped the floor with all of us.
There were just funny moments. I remember a friend putting in a -3 into your scoring pile, and you're sitting there going, and then he thought he was being clever and put in a second -3 and thought, oh yeah, that'll be -6, and then forgetting that they cancel each other out, because there's so many niche, weird nuance moments in this game that you just kind of forget about them. But when they happen, you're not frustrated that you forgot about them. They're funny, right?
Yeah.
It's very emergent gameplay, which is very rare in trick takers because they are such mathematical, mechanical games, right? And that is the joy of them. I certainly enjoy them for that. But just having this sort of feel of like anything can happen, and sometimes those things will happen because we are stupid, is amazing.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, that's not unique to us, I hope. But yeah, there were times when we were playing yesterday when especially you kept, or you two kept trying to make me lead tricks, which I think is almost the hardest thing to do in this game, because you don't quite know where to start. And it's like with my bidding and auction problem where I just don't know where to start if I'm starting a bid. It's a similar sort of thing. I'm not quite sure how to lead a trick and what to play. And I think you kind of played into that. Both of you played into that, because at one point I said, why are you bullying me? Like, why are you making me do things I don't want to be doing? And it was just very funny, very silly. And then towards the end, because you wanted to get exactly 40 points and you had, I don't know, how many points did you have?
I had 35.
35.
And then I had 5 points in my scoring pile.
Was it,
I was like, this is amazing.
And
there are only 3 cards left.
And then we were like, okay, it's time to ruin this joy that you're feeling right now.
I was ruined.
But I mean, I'm making it sound a lot more angry, I think, than it is. It is very silly. It's all done in good fun. And I really like this game as well. It's such a pub type game.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that pleases my inner old man very much.
Yeah, fair enough. Another note, we only played this at free players. We played it a couple of times at free players and really enjoyed ourselves. It works really well at free. The game plays from 3 to 5. And it was our friend John Cox, whose coverage kind of pointed us to this game. And John said to me, thank you, John, by the way, love this game. John said it works great at all player counts.
Okay.
And John did also point out that sometimes he's had games where people win with like 3 points, even though, maximum score is 40 because someone busts out and no one else is taking any points. It can happen.
Yeah, it's a very thinky game. It's there's a lot of decisions to make, whether you want to win this trick, whether you don't, whether you can make someone else win the trick to make them lose points or make them gain too many points, or it's really different like that. Yeah,
it feels different. It feels smart, but it also feels stupid. Fantastic package. If you can get your hands on Schadenfreude, do. Elaine, you want to add to it?
Yeah, only that it still feels very trick-takery. Like, so if you like trick-taking games, then this might be one that you like too. It's not so different that, it goes off-piste completely.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it feels very much in the territory of trick-taking games.
Still to come, we have Great Western Trail New Zealand, but first a game whose description reads, "It's a lousy gig, so it's perfect for the likes of you." Freelancers comes from publisher Plant Hat Games by designer Donald Schultz with art by Chris Bryan, Alison Carl, Sam Mamoli, Sean McCoy and Carl Stjernberg. There's a lot of artists in this game.
There are, but also it's continuing the theme of games that are smart, but also pretty stupid, and a lot of fun. I say all those things apply to Freelancers by design.
Why is it called a Crossroads game, Efka?
Well, it's because it's following this weird line of games, which I'm sure by now is just a brand name because theoretically, I don't think it has anything to do with the original Crossroads game, which was Dead of Winter. Then there was going to be another one about samurai, which they axed. And then there was Gen 7, which we have critically panned, and we were not the only one. And it's now a bargain bin kind of purchase that you can find for, I heard, as low as £7.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a game I was sad about.
Yeah,
Like.
It had big ideas, but never worked out. And then they recalibrated and did a very silly game called Forgotten Waters, which we enjoyed greatly. And you can find coverage of that on our YouTube channel, no pun included. There's a video. I liked Forgotten Waters a lot. I thought it was very, very silly. But it had a few moments of mechanical fiddliness. And Freelancers feels like the game Forgotten Waters a lot. Yeah. And it feels like they're finally...
Very different setting.
Yeah, very different setting. But similar type of humor, because Forgotten Waters was like fantasy pirates, but very stupid. And this is post-apocalypse, but D&D, but also very stupid.
Like Forgotten Waters had that card, and it was like old boots or something. And it said ugly but functional, just like you. You know, it's that kind of humour.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
Yeah, I think that card encapsulates the entire mood. Yeah, so it is very preposterous and very on the nose and very silly. And it is basically a kind of, I guess if you wanted to introduce someone to the idea of adventure games, right? So things that feel like D&D, but are pre-scripted, and you don't have to improvise a narrative. You just have to provide some silly prompts on your character sheet, but the rest is either a narrative delivered to you via audio narration, which comes with the assistant app that you have to use for this game, or just sort of things that happen in the game from dice rolls or rules or whatever, but or cards that you draw, but there's no kind of like improvisational actual storytelling going on. It's just an adventure that you go on.
That's not quite true. There is a little bit of improvisational storytelling at points.
Yes.
Where you have to maybe say something and see if the other players like the thing that you have said or said it in the correct way.
Exactly. That has happened. And I thought it was fun. I thought it was a nice kind of, again, like almost like training wheels for an actual role-playing game.
Yeah.
You try and be spontaneous right now. And I think it's great for that. It's that kind of grounded environment that does pushes you a little bit maybe out of your comfort zone. But I had a great time with this. Now, I don't think this is going to be a slam dunk for everyone, but if you like the idea of going on a silly adventure with a lot of humor, with excellent voice acting that I think is greatly improved from Forgotten Waters, where it was already really good, then this is definitely something you should be having a look at. And if you found Forgotten Waters fiddly, then this is less fiddly. It feels more cohesive. Yeah, I think it is. Forgotten Waters had this whole map element with the tiles.
Sure,
I think this just works better. You just have a paper map, you draw on it where you're going, and then press a button,
I guess.
Thing happens, right?
There's still a lot of bits to control, though, especially in a two-player game. In a four-player game, there was fewer, but in a two-player game, there's a lot of different aspects to control. Like, you're effectively playing the roles of these characters. So you're fiddling dials or you're adding on tokens to certain boards. So there's lots to keep up with there. It's still a little fiddly, but not in a bad way.
No, not in a bad way. It's worth noting that this on the box it's minimum 3 players with a maximum of 7, but there are 2-player rules. I think this game maybe falls a little bit flat at 2, but it's still fine. This is definitely a game that you're again gonna play in a more kind of relaxed environment, maybe with a few drinks with some friends. Wouldn't play this at a board game club unless you know everyone really well. You don't want to play this with strangers because the game is weird and purposely so, and I think you have to be comfortable with the people you're playing with.
It's also a little bit subversive and tongue-in-cheek, I think, this game. The fact that you are freelancers in this awful world,
yes.
I mean, that's why I read out that quote, because that's kind of encapsulates the feeling of this game. Like, that's who you are. You're freelancers in this awful world because humanity has ruined everything and you are in the trash and you're just trying to scrape a living.
And the humans are dead.
And the humans are dead. But there is some theme of that through the narration of this game. Of humanity has ruined everything. You're in the trash. You're just trying to scrape a living.
Yeah.
So you have to be all right with that. Plus, I agree with you. I don't think it would be good to play at a board game club because you would have to have everyone listening to the narration. And board game clubs can be quite noisy places. So that would be hard. You do need to have everyone listening nicely.
Yeah. What I did like about it is how simple it was to get into it. All you need to understand really to start playing is the simple concept of like dice checks. So you roll a d20 and maybe like an extra die based on your skill. So it could be a d4 or a d6 or d8 or d10. And you see if you go above a number or below a number, and then things happen. And what's nice is that, again, anytime anything happens, most of the time you just enter a code into the app and immediately voiceover narration, kind of livens the whole thing up. It's zingy, it's funny. One of my favorite bits is that whenever a player character is supposed to be speaking you, right? The way the voice actor plays it is like you're a total idiot. Like it sounds like a complete buffoon. Like this sort of incredulous slightly higher pitched voice, like, I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, it is a bit like that's funny. Yeah,
you're almost always the stupidest person around
because it's like we've been thrown together and we've no idea what we're doing really. Like one of the narrations said, finally a quest. Okay, it is very tongue-in-cheek, even with the voice acting, but it's very good. It's much better than having a book full of text, I think, and having to struggle through it if that's something you struggle with.
The other thing I like is the creative character roles, again, because it sets up the game and what it's going to feel like from the very beginning. And I think that's really nice. So you basically have 2 character sheets that sort of come together. One part of it is like sort of who you are, your species, and the other one is your job. So this is where it went funny. Like, so the species were things like a goblin or a dog person, which looks like a Labrador, right? And then,
but with clothes on.
Yes, of course. And a stick with a giant dog biscuit that makes it look like a hammer.
Because that's what dogs would have.
Yeah, of course, naturally.
I mean, why would they waste their dog biscuits though on like a weapon?
Well, because if you've seen a dog biscuit, they're tough as nails, right? You put that on a stick, you're going to whack someone, they're not going to get up.
Well, no. But it'd be like putting a cake on a weapon.
Yeah, but cake, you can't wax.
A rock bun. What about a rock bun?
Fruitcake.
Yeah. Well, no, that's soft.
No, it's not.
Well, it depends how you cook it.
They're dense and disgusting. I don't like fruitcake.
No, love a fruitcake.
And then you pick a profession, and it's things like friar. So that's already comedic because you think, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna be like some sort of a monk type person. No, they mean you fry. Yeah, you fry things religiously. Yeah. And so there's that, and or there's other professions like divorcee, And you do what you want with that. That's your job, apparently.
Or PI.
PI, yeah.
Yeah.
Spell sword, which is like a D&D class, right?
Yeah.
But what they actually mean is spells word.
Yeah.
You're a word speller.
Yeah.
Magical word speller.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's very silly.
So that's what you can expect from it. I enjoyed my way throughout. I have one reservation.
Go on.
As Natch in these kind of things, the last confrontation is some sort of a boss fight, right? And this is where it becomes very mechanical and dice rolly. And there are little puzzly elements like, oh, maybe we should do this. And you know that moment in D&D where like the GM creates this like grandiose battle, right? You know, there's a dragon or something and you're in some sort of a massive castle hall or something, right?
Yeah.
Things are flying about or some sort of cataclysm is coming down from the sky. Things are happening everywhere, right? And one player gets really clever and says, oh, can I just do this? And then that will end the fight, you know? And then the GM goes, I don't know, try it, roll the dice. It doesn't feel like there's any tangible big moment like that where players can get creative, right? And I know it's hard to engineer that, you know, in a board game, right? But there are creative ways where you can overcome a big fight with smarts rather than just chucking dice, right? And I think there's a little bit of that. There are kind of things you can figure out to mitigate the situation, but it still leans very heavily into that dice chucking aspect, and the game never relied on, like, the entire, you know, time leading up to this boss fight. It never relies on that ethos of like, let's roll a lot of dice.
But
know?
I think I know what you're saying, and I agree with you. It did fall a bit flat, and it did feel a little bit strung out, a little bit lengthened at the end. It was like, okay, can we get on with this? Can we finish this now? I mean, well, that's the other thing. It was really long. I didn't expect it to be as long as it was.
It says 90 minutes on the box. It didn't
Was it
feel
90
like
minutes
it.
Per player?
It's not that bad, but yeah, it was.
It took some time.
I think it took us 3 hours. But again, we were playing in a very relaxed atmosphere.
This is true.
There were beers, there was food, you know.
This is true. But no, my actual point was that, you know, when you have these restrictions, like you said, it's almost like a role-playing game pared down. So it limits your need to understand all the mechanisms of what a role-playing game is, but then it also limits your options and your choices. So the fact that we ended up in this kind of boss battle and there was only certain solution to kill this boss, I think is just a product of that, of the fact that there is a lot of restriction, which is good because it guides you. But then it does fall a little bit flat at the end, particularly if you're used to playing more open role-playing games.
I don't know. I wish there was more some sort of a kind of a reliance on things you found throughout the play session, and maybe we just didn't find it. Maybe they do exist.
Maybe.
But I just want, I don't know. I wanted more connectivity and more like it felt like an actual challenge rather than like a dice chucking, you know, marathon.
Having to get the right result on the dice.
Yeah.
Like, I think
over and over and over.
When it always comes down to that, it becomes, I don't want to say tedious. It wasn't tedious. That's not true. We were still having a nice time. But it becomes repetitive.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. And so this is kind of a minor gripe because I enjoyed my time overall. I think it's quite vibrant. It's silly. It's light. It's one of those games that you can just kind of drop on the table and say, let's play. We'll learn how to play as we go along. And I wouldn't normally do that with board games, but I did it with this one. And we had someone at the table who was almost new to board games, and they were fine. They didn't have any issue, you know, just kind of getting into it and playing it, because the general sort of humor was kind of evident and the style that it was going for, and the rules, you can kind of build on them as you go along. As long as you understand what rolling a die is and getting a certain result, you can play this game.
And because it's cooperative as well, there's no worry about having to kind of teach them a bit by bit. So, if they're not sure how to do something to be effective, it's not hard to say, okay, well, a D20 is this one, a D4 is this one, will means this, or smarts means this. This is what you have to do. And it doesn't interrupt the game too much. So, no, that is nice. Did you like the Mad Libs?
I like the Mad Libs. When you're creating your character, you do some Mad Libs, and then that fills in your backstory. And they were my favorite part of Forgotten Waters. They are a little bit pared down in this one. I think
that's a shame.
Yeah.
I really like them too in Forgotten Waters, because
they were really good.
It was so... I mean, that game is silly anyway. Mad Libs is silly anyway. But, if you pick slightly the wrong kind of thing that it wants you to go for, you would end up with something even funnier than
intended. Yeah, it's good.
Slip and slide.
No one will know what that means. No one will know what that means.
But you do.
I do. Elaine, do you think with its subversive humor, this game is appropriate for younger audiences?
From what we've seen of it so far, yes. There's not any bad language in it. There's not any... there's not real violence in it. But I don't know, because we have only played one full campaign.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, go ahead.
I thought at one point it asked us if we were okay with swearing, and we could say yes or no.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, and I thought that was like a clever way of handling it.
Did it do swears? Did it do swears?
I think it later started doing swears, yeah.
Okay, but nothing major.
No. So, I don't know. I'd be a little cautious and maybe, research more. But rules-wise, I think it's appropriate for younger audiences because it's not particularly complicated. And the whole kind of, vibrant, silly character sheets and the tone of it is very suitable,
You mean like young teenagers?
Yeah, young teenagers, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Not like 4-year-olds.
No. But, I know a lot of parents who listen to... I know that there are a lot of parents who listen to our podcast who are always on the lookout for a game to play with their kids, right? And I think this could be suitable. Definitely some research into the swearing aspect of it, but otherwise, yeah. I mean, it can be violent, but cartoon, very strictly cartoon violent.
Like Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner type violence, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think you're okay with that, it should be fine.
Before we move on to our interview with Kieron Gillen, Greg has emailed in regarding cards potentially being non-functional if they're dinged up. Do you remember we spoke about that in the last episode? They say, just a quick note that the discussion on wear and tear in the last podcast reminded me of Aliman's Tarot, a deliberately mismatched tarot deck I spotted on Kickstarter recently, specifically because one of the higher level rewards has a copy of the deck which has been annotated, marked on, stained, maybe burnt, and definitely written on to make it unique and thoroughly worn. Quite a difference from the usual deluxe edition or sleeving cards to keep them pristine.
That's kind of amazing. We've come full circle to where they pre-hole your denim jeans, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought of as well, comparing it to pre-worn jeans. I don't know what I think about that. I guess you can just sleeve cards.
I like that maybe in theory, but in practice it's we'll make your deck look aged for you, but you haven't, the whole appeal of an aged look is that
you've used it over and over and over again,
exactly,
right? Or someone has.
Yeah. Or does it even matter? Because, I'll buy jeans with a hole in them, a pre-hole jean.
Would you?
Yeah, I guess, because you do. I know.
No.
Have you never?
No, I accidentally bought some with a hole in because they fell apart within a week. Because they were a used pair of jeans. They didn't come with a hole, but within a week they did have a hole, yeah. No, I don't know. Why would I do that?
I don't know. But does it matter? I don't know. Look, let's all agree that some scuffed cards in some wear and tear can be a nice, good thing. It shows that your game has been loved. My copy of Schadenfreude is already scuffed.
This is true.
This has happened. I just got it. We just started playing it, started enjoying it. And I thought, I should have sleeved it. And then I remembered
You
I remembered
remembered
this,
this
you know.
thing, yeah?
Yeah, I was like, no, it's okay. It's fine that it's scuffed. I'm enjoying it. It's good. Everyone join the scuffed revolution with me now. Hands up in the air.
So that you can count cards.
No more
so
sleeves.
That you know what the cards are.
No more sleeves.
Before someone plays them.
I agree that in some games it's really important.
You might as well play Hanabi at that point. Right?
Yeah. In some games it's really important. It does. I recognize that there are games where it will just sort of ruin the game. If you can tell that this card is this specific thing, then it's like, okay, the game stops functioning. And I can get behind that, right? But I think we worry about it too much.
And now the bit that you've all actually tuned in for, not me and Efka rabbiting on, it's the interview with Kieron Gillen.
I would like to preface this interview with a couple of things. First of all, I know that some of you employ the practice that I don't condone, but I do abide by, of listening to podcasts at a higher speed than intended. Now, if you are doing that, I recommend that for this particular segment, you turn this function off, because Kieron is a very fast speaker. The other thing I'd like to say is that this discussion centers a lot around a role-playing game that Kieron designed called Die. Now, the premise of the role-playing game is that you are playing real-world human beings, normal beings who get together to play a role-playing game. It just happens that this particular sinister role-playing game ports you over into a metafictional world called Die, where the rules of the game govern pretty much how that world functions. So it becomes very literary roleplay, if that makes sense. I wanted to preface that because we just sort of straight up jump into it at some point down the line. But I also wanted to talk to Kieron about Die, because Die circles around a lot of things that I am particularly interested in. You know, the sort of metafictionality of games and how they're sometimes more real than we give them credit for. And so a lot of this discussion will center around that, but also just some general Kieron Gillen gaming interests as we go along. Delighted to welcome to the show Kieron Gillen. Some of you will remember Kieron as a video game journalist. Most of you will recognize him as a comic book author responsible for The Wicked and Divine, Phonogram, Die, many Marvel titles, including some great X-Men runs. Also Star Wars, Darth Vader run, Dr. Aphra. Kieron, you wrote so many things, but today we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about tabletop, role-playing games, board games. We'll talk cardboard. So I asked this question to every guest because I think it's just a fun thing to find out. But what was Kieron's, small Kieron's, young Kieron's earliest memorable game experience? What was the moment where you're like, oh, games, cool?
I'm old enough to sort of, people writing about their formative games.
Mm-hmm.
I was old enough to be us writing autobiographically about games to be cool and new. So it's just kind of like that. If anyone, I've written about games, the games that got me in so many times. I just did Simon Parkin's podcast recently, and I deliberately chose 5 not good games, as in 5 games which I wanted to be better, but I was kind of obsessed with anyway, just because I've talked about that so often. However, my first origin story game I always think is The Hobbit, the Melbourne House text adventure Hobbit game, which dates me significantly. And my family weren't exactly technophobic, but they weren't ever really ahead of the curve or anything. So my best mate Dave Highland, we were walking to the swimming bath and back every week as part of school, and he always telling about this game, The Hobbit, and what was happening in it. So he was like, "Oh yeah, we found these trolls. I've got to wait till dawn, and they became Oh man, I got this bit of the spiders, and they come down for the sea now, and no idea. Oh no, I've locked in the I keep on getting drunk with Gandalf and all this, whatever." And I'm like, it sounds like, oh, this is astounding. So obviously when you're 5 or 6, a week is forever.
Yeah.
So in a few weeks' time, I eventually go to David's house, and his brother's Spectrum, as it was then, and he loads it up and he shows it to me, and I sort of turn to him in horror and say, "You never told me it was just text." And that was one of those kind of if you want to sum up my relationship with the medium, in fact, full stop, the potential versus actuality is very much there. But it's stuff like, Gauntlet was really important to me as a 10-year-old. Kung Fu Master, hugely important to me as a slightly younger gamer. God, there's a lot of games. like that was definitely. I remember like playing Kung Fu Master in the local working men's club, because that's kind of, I'm like a working class sort of background, so there's this one club there, and I remember actually playing it quite obsessively. And one of the older kids said, had no idea, why do you throw your money into that? No money, money doesn't come out. The point being, right. it's not a gambling machine. And what I thought, what I couldn't quite express then, is like, I just didn't understand it. It's like, don't you understand? Pleasure comes out. And that's kind of like, that says a lot about what I felt about games as well. But like, yeah. But if you go to, like, you remember seeing seeing D&D on the television? That tiny opening of ET. Everyone always forgets they play D&D at the start of it, at ET. You know what I mean? Like, and just seeing that and thinking, or fighting fantasy books, or the I was obsessed by the Lone Wolf adventure books. You know what I mean?
Yes.
This weird kind of, it was harder to do games then. In that kind of, like, I had to write off the Games Workshop to get the big the A3 sheets and stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's hard. I don't think it's a good thing. But I like, as a kind of, you're aware you had to sort of dig to get the weird stuff.
Yeah. So what about board games? We're just sort of like in the periphery, because all this like D&D and fighting fantasy stuff was I imagine that's captivating your imagination. Were board games always just something that's like in the background, and then you've discovered them later, or were they always present?
They were always present to some degree. I mean, like, I must admit, as when I got into games journalism, when I was like my first work was when I was 19, but when I started really theorising around as I was 21, I used to think that video games were something fundamentally different from other forms of gaming. I used to think it was kind of the microchip does something. The idea the microchip takes stuff out of people's hands and yada 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 yada. And through that metaphor, I turned things like, I don't know, like Dance Dance Revolution into not video games. In my theory. Of course, that theory is nonsense. I'm very much now the position is, no, then all games are fundamentally the same thing. Like, lots of things change around the edges, but they're all wrestling with something, the question of what ludic nature is, yada yada yada. So yeah, I was always playing some board games, and sometimes they were just terrible board games. Like, we played Escape from the Valley of the Dinosaurs so much. We played Crossbows and Catapults, which of course just re-kickstarted. I did back because I couldn't help myself. I was that guy. So all those sort of family games we played. But like, the one thing about Games Workshop back then, they were all, as well as doing their own games, they were also distributing other people's games. Like, so there was some exposure to other stuff through there. A little bit later, I was playing like the American hobby game stuff. I didn't really Eurogames weren't really on the scene until like well into the 90s, when I played Settlers when it broke in America a bit. You know what I mean? So it's in the mix then. As a teenager, I can literally your readers will be throwing bricks in my head. So we played a lot of Talisman. And I swear, Talisman is much. The problem with Talisman, it's a game that goes on as long as it takes someone's deciding to win. It's not, you can always win like 3 hours before anyone tries to. But like Steve Jackson games, stuff like Illuminati, I really liked as a teenager. Obviously not now, but like there's something really compelling there. We played a lot of Little Green Men from Outer Space, another Steve Jackson's game we really like. Have you played that one?
No, not familiar.
I tell you what, it's a Star Trek game basically. So all the Star Trek crew are all aliens and the blobs from space. And so the blobs appear and you've got to destroy the blobs. The interesting mechanic is all the different objects on the ship are weapons, and every time you use a weapon on an alien, you draw a chit discovering what the weapon does.
Right.
And some of them are like some of them are different levels of murderous, and some of them are like, oh no, they explode and become more. So you basically, the whole game is you trying, or one side trying the guns or kitchen stuff or like a fire extinguisher to see what actually works and what doesn't work. And of course that means it's completely unbalanced. But that's the fun of it. You have no idea what the hell's going to happen.
It's a playground, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of one of those things, like, even then I understood that wasn't, for me, that wasn't, obviously I like balanced games, I played chess and whatever, but like, the sheer joy and chaos of the setup of that was also quite appealing.
What about now? Like, if we took like the last 5 years, is there a game, I guess I'm leaning more like board games and tabletop games, was there something that left a real indelible memory in terms of a game session that happened, and what was that game?
For this audience, you're going to throw bricks. The last 5 years have been incredibly bad for board games for me. Like, I played a lot of board games from about 2010 to like 2016, 17, and then I drifted out, and I become almost entirely play role-playing games now. And it's partially because I'm a new parent. It's partially because of COVID. But the ability to get people together to play a board game was so much lower down the list. So it's just other things got prioritised. So I'm out the loop to an enormous degree. However, if I was talking about the last 5 years, the one game I really did sort of dig into was the Lord of the Rings collectible card game. The not collectible, so the living card game. And during COVID, I had about 6 months I was playing that by myself. Like the proper full on, I'm going to play decks and, and that. And it really did something. I'm an enormous Lord of the Rings fan. I mentioned The Hobbit already earlier. But like that kind of losing myself in this little, how can I build these structures? How can I make these little engines? And in a time of, obviously complete chaos we all went through, like it was a really useful sort of, here's a thing that vaguely stabilizes. Here's a structural element. Here's somewhere I can have control. Yeah, that's the main thing. Actually, I was going to count. Like, I still play Warhammer-y, board gamey, not miniature stuff, but they don't really count. I always say it's like if Warhammer was a good game, like we wouldn't spend all the time painting the miniatures. It can't just be about the game. It's got to be, what I mean? It's got to be about something more than it's got to be about the larger experience, the miniatures and the chaos and the storytelling. Because it's because if it's just the game could never be good enough to justify the amount of time it takes.
When we were talking to Adrian Tchaikovsky, I did ask him, do you play, miniature war games as well? Because I noticed you paint, and he said, no, I just paint. I just like the painting. It's nice and therapeutic, right? And it's weird. Solo games have had a real sort of re-emergence, I guess, but also like an emergence because they were always there in the background. But we're now talking about them in a much more kind of like, oh yeah, solo board games, that's a thing, right? And it feels almost like COVID gave us permission to enjoy that and be like, hey, yeah, no, this is something cool, and you can do that, and it is structured, and it is kind of like, you almost get a different experience out of it than playing socially.
I think you're probably right. I mean, like I mentioned Games Workshop. I mean, one of the Games Workshop games, but I did play a lot when I was a kid, was Chainsaw Warrior. And Chainsaw Warrior was a solo board game back in the mid-'80s. With amazing Brett Ewan's art, I think. And that was deck-based, like sort of. It felt like a proto-roguelike made of paper, and it's just different sort. And of course, we talk about journaling RPGs as well. Talk about something else. There's a lot going on there.
So you wrote a comic book called Die, which shares a setting, a premise, and universe with a role-playing game called Die, which you also wrote, and I think that makes you one of the few people who wrote fiction centered around tabletop games. What made you want to do that? And can you tell me a bit more about what it was like to summon that?
I'm going to add the caveat before. Listen, I appear to be imagining people just throwing stuff at me today. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe it's my baby throwing stuff at me. The question of fiction and gaming is really interesting in terms of what people have done it. And obviously you got the fairly big stuff like Ready Player One and whatever. But if you dig down deep here, you've got the litter RPG scene, I believe it's called. And I haven't read any of that, but they're basically, as far as I understand it, a genre of fiction which is based around pretending, using the conventions of RPGs as literal things in the fiction. If that makes any sense? Mm-hmm. So, in other words, like characters gain levels. I know. Okay, I'm saying that I've never read any, so I don't really know. Because for me, that sounds terrible. The idea of just taking it as a natural thing, unless you were going to make it a satire, that doesn't appeal to me in the slightest. However, like from Die, I did a book called Phonogram, which was about my relationship with pop music. It was about the idea of like how music made me better and how music made me worse, and what sorts of people lose themselves in music. And in some ways, Die was me doing that about my love of gaming and tabletop and whatever else. So it's about like, it came from me thinking, did I fall into a fantasy world at the age of 15 and, not come out? How much has the amount I have loved this stuff hurt me and the people around me? And of course, that's just typical of me, because I'm always into the downside as well as the upside. Like Die, if you read it, it's also about the transcendence people get from games, and that's where it kind of comes from as a thing. I said, okay, I haven't written seriously about games in a while. Like when Die came around, like obviously I had 15 years of writing about it before, but like I want to do something that digs into why people play, specifically RPGs. And of course, being me, Die also became like this history of the RPG. So the whole story is, as well as about the characters, these broken people thrown into a fantasy world, it's also about how did RPGs come into being. And it's weird, like Lovecraftian conspiracy story about basically if you read Playing at the World, it kind of takes the Playing at the World's threefold model, which is like the Brontes' shared paracosm, because the Brontes played RPGs basically. You've got the Prussian war games, the Kriegspiel, and you've got basically the fiction of Tolkien. You know, in terms of like this weird outsider art guy who's also an Oxford dog. So that's kind of how we trace these things through and see where they lead. I've completely forgot what the question is, mate. Why did I do it?
Yeah, why did you do it? You know,
It was one of the things that I think doing stuff only you would do is a good idea as a creative. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way. I mean, because obviously other people could write stuff about this specific. But like that idea of trying to do this piece of fiction that's also a piece of criticism and also satire, and also doing it as an RPG at the same time. Because that's the really weird thing about Die. Because people often ask me, like, is it a tie-in RPG or is it, you know? And for a long time I had no idea. I thought, what's the dog? What's the tail? And I eventually the dog ate its own tail and became a dog Ouroboros. And I sort of now think of Die as two ways of looking at the same thing. You know, like Die exists in a realm outside our imagination, and the comic will explain certain things, and the game will explain certain other things. And by holding these two contradictory ideas in your head at the same time, you'll get a better picture. At least that's how I tell my accountant, and therefore justify my RPG spending.
a couple of episodes ago, Elaine, who's my co-host and my wife, she asked me, "Does anyone write board game fan fiction?" You know, and my like almost instant reply was, "Well, why would you? That sounds terribly naff." You know, like and a listener wrote in saying, "Well, actually, there's this thing called a diary of a settler of Catan." And it's just like these little like entries of every day, you know, like day 17, you know, I found some wood, gonna go find someone to trade it for sheep or something like that, you know. When I read Die, the comic book, I had a real sense of, you know, you almost kind of inhabiting these conventions that we kind of assume and take for granted at a table, but they become sort of real. What was it like to transpire them as real?
If I have an ability, it's to take things too seriously. And I mean, like, and obviously, I hope that people are aware when I'm talking about myself, I'm aware how ridiculous I am. I think that's my saving grace. I would be unbearable if I wasn't aware of what a complete fool I was. But the idea of, okay, let's just take it seriously for a second. Because, you know, there's been quite a few, I said, games about, you know, comics about games or comics about video games. But the idea of, no, let's really kind of embrace all the tropes and take them very seriously. And I just think the idea of, because that's what we call in comics a deconstructionary tendency. I mean, Watchmen is the idea, let's take superhero comics seriously. And Watchmen follows through the implications of that. And I'm kind of doing that through RPGs and Die. You know, we name check Watchmen in episode 1. And that's the clear influence in terms of, okay, let's take, you know, those... Okay, just off the, like the Godbinders in Die, which is basically our riff on the clerics. And Godbinders is born of the weird realisation. Like in D&D, it's like, is it weird that your God will heal you for D8 wounds or something? It's like, imagine like Jesus, like, okay, I can heal you, but only a little bit. You'll have to come back tomorrow after I've had a little sleep to heal the rest. You know what I mean? That's like ludicrous. But that's... And Godbinders kind of turn that into a much more transactional relationship with God in that way. And it's worth stressing, like, a lot of RPGs have played this game anyway. Because when I say deconstructionary, what you really mean, what's the fun twist? What's an interesting way to think about this? And in some ways, I think that's what fiction, in fact, for me, also really good, quite often good game design, not always, but quite often, gives you a different way of seeing things. Like, I'm about to run a game next week of Grant Howitt, the Rowan Rook and Decker designer and owner, or co-owner rather. Called Royal Blood. And Royal Blood is a game where you play the face cards in the tarot deck, and you're in a heist to rip off the power and supplant the existence of one of the major tarot. You know, as in like, you know, and they immediately hear that, of course, because obviously the minor arcana hate the major arcana. Those major arcana are real bastards, you know. And that's kind of that moment of like, that's a wonderful magical click, and that's what I think fiction does, and that's what I think kind of what Die tries to do in terms of, hey, think about this. Yeah, and it's a spark of joy, and it's what I love in my fiction. There's so much of being a writer, in fact, I think so much of being anything. It's about, okay, what excites you, and hoping other people share that level of like, oh my god, look at this.
In your author's note of the Die role-playing game, you say you're trying to make a game that answers the question, why do we play games? And I realize fully that every person is probably going to have a different answer to that. But have you found yours through writing that, or are you still looking?
In some ways, Die the actual comic was a kind of pretty good. I mean, I was talking about the characters. Like at the end, like Ash makes a speech about what games are for, and And I don't want to spoil it for the listeners who haven't. And in some ways, that's quite close to it. And I think the kind of the weird the line that kind of runs all the way through Die is, "It's all for you. It's all for you." And that's the weird kind of monkey's paw promise of RPGs and games, and the idea of like, it is all for you, and that's kind of for better or worse. And that, what does it tell you? That you have chosen this. What does this say? And there's a line of, especially RPGs. There's a line I had Ash say towards the end, like the Apocalypse Key. It's not Apocalypse Keys. The Apocalypse World designers, they had the insight that games were a conversation. And the way their games, as in one player says this, and they build up the conversation. And of course, it's like you should probably listen to what the game is telling you, and vice versa. Like why are you saying this? I mean, so many people will talk about how many coming out stories have involved an RPG, or how many these are fantasies are important because they're a magic circle where it's safe to approach things which might be too scary to approach other ways. And this, like, I wrote about games for 15 years, like pretty intensely, and I think the flexibility is quite important. Like, so why do people read books? Like, I couldn't give a single answer to that, and I would distrust any single answer. But what do I think the game does is, since you, just so to explain briefly to your listeners the game, like it's a meta RPG basically. You gather around, you make up messed up, broken human beings from the real world, then you sit down, pretend to make up characters for an RPG, and then the messed up people you've made up get dragged into the fantasy world and probably take the physical form of the characters they've made. And then they decide whether or not to go home or not. And the fantasy world is full of their traumas thrown back at them. It's basically psychogeography and therapy externalised, and fight scenes against orcs probably too. But the key thing about it is, if you're basically asking, because the persona generation section basically answers the questions in terms of, okay, what makes you sad? Or like, why is your life not turned out right? Or whatever, the personas. And you'll always probably mind yourself slightly. But it's also safely not you. So the more the game goes on, and especially because it always ends with genuinely the players having a debate which may break into a fight of whether the game should continue or stop, you're answering the question of, does this character, this persona you've made up, want fantasy more than reality or vice versa, and what are they willing to do to get it? And in some ways, that's going to echo you a little. So it's a safe way to think about parts of yourself. And that's the sting in Die, because it's really good fun. Despite the potential stuff of how I've described here in terms of it being a big question game, in reality it's really entertaining, and most importantly it's emotional, because it's like when you start at the multiple levels it sounds really cold, you know what I mean, man? It's like yeah, but like in actual play it's incredibly direct, because it's like, I don't know what an elf feels like, I don't know what an orc feels like, but I do know what like a sad middle-aged guy might feel like, or like a teenager who's confused about, I know real people are really easy to roleplay because we're surrounded by them, and that's what makes it really human, I think, and what most excites me about it.
I think it's also terrifying, when I read Die, the comic book, I was like, I think part of the emotional journey you undergo as a reader is like, oh, okay, right? I thought it was going to be Jumanji, and then suddenly this is actually terrifying, but you're not experiencing that. You can relate to them, right? Because I think, the characters are constructed in that way where, like, they're not just like archetypes in a role-playing game, they're sort of archetypes of people as well, and you can find relatability in one of them at least, if not more. But then you're presented with this idea in the role-playing game. Now you do it, right? Like, now you be the person that goes through that. That's scary, right?
Yeah. But like the safety is the condom, essentially. It's the contraceptive between you and the game. As in, no, it's not you. It's a character you've made up. Yes, it may bear similarities to you, but it's not you. So that makes it a little safer. I think like one of the reasons I did Die was to show how it was done. Like I think there's a quote from Alex Roberts, which I put in the interview I did in the back of one of the issues. Alex Roberts, the amazing designer for the Queen, which is for the Queen as a side point. It's one of the RPGs in the last 5 years, which feels like almost like a gateway to board gamers, because it has the tropes of a board game. It's about cards passing around. It's like I recommend it strongly. It plays like in an hour. It's an incredibly great game. But she said something like, society tends to make treat creatives like these godheads or whatever. I stress, I'm paraphrasing her, she doesn't say this. Like, she's created this distant thing, and creativity is something that's done to us, something we're an audience for. And what an RPG does, and games more generally, sort of, no, like, creativity is infinite. We can sit down with a few mechanics and a few guidelines, and at the end of the evening, we'll have made a world together. And that's kind of what I want to do with Die, in terms of democratise how Die is done. As in, Die is, making messed up people. I don't just like throw that open to people. I explicitly, these are the way, ask these questions to the players. By answering them, you'll get a group of interesting people, by which I mean characters you can do a story with. Then they do a series of rituals that takes the personas into the game, and then the whole kind of going in the adventure bit. We've cooked up ways to, okay, you all that stuff you did earlier with those persona, those flaws. This is how you're going to turn those flaws into story. This is how you're going to turn somebody's fear of their parents into an encounter with a dragon or whatever. And then at the end, this is how we'll get a climax, because Die also somewhat unusually has a set climax, as in the players all get together and decide to go home or not, and there's a vote basically, and dead people don't get any votes. Therefore, it turns the game into the central Western drama idea is, what does someone want and what were they willing to do to get it? That's what most Western drama is about. And that's the game. So structurally, I took Die and analysed it down to the bare basics, and then built it up into a game. So you can absolutely it will personalise enormously depending the people you make up, but it's still going to hold together as a story that works like Die. There's a kind of this is the messed up thing about it. Like I was chatting to Amal, who did this amazing writer. She wrote How to Lose the Time War, which is an amazing novella. I strongly recommend it. And we're talking about, she's also gone into indie RPG design and play. And it seems like it's no longer enough to be able to actually me to write the story. I have to be able to write something that allows somebody else to create the story, that implies I haven't understood it. By breaking down Die and explaining how Die is done means I now understand Die much better. In other words, it's like being a critic. For me, you can only really understand the piece of work until you can break it down to the component rules and then allow it to be recreated. That's where I am at the moment, anyway.
Where can people find more about Die? Where can they discover Die, and where can they discover more of what you do?
Well, people can... Kieron Gillen, that's my name. Kieron Gillen, basically everywhere. I'm abstractly on Twitter, though I'm only just posting updates for stuff. I'm not actually on Twitter. Sorry. I'm on Blue Sky a bit more. The best place to get me is my newsletter. I've got a button-down newsletter. So Kieron Gillen newsletter, you'll find it. You may find the Substack first. There's a link to the actual real newsletter from there. And I basically, every week or two, I'll download what's going on, like what I've released comic-wise, what I've released games-wise, what's undergoing. There's a Die Discord. You should actually go to die-rpg.com. If not that, enter Die RPG, Rowan, Rook and Deckard. It's able to buy there. Rowan, Rook and Deckard have got it all. It's available from game shops, etc. There's a Discord for people to join and chat about the game. And we're at work on the first expansion for Die, which is basically a series of adventures of different ways to play the game. And mine's like a hex crawl about a group of people who are all hung up over their various hexes. So emotional and messy, as per usual. But yeah, and I'm working on a few other small games myself. Just for fun of it.
And we'll put all of those links in the description. Kieron, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this interview, we have a lot of great interviews that we've recorded in previous episodes with Andrew Navarro, Paul Dean, Jesse Genders, OEB, Adrian Tchaikovsky, and many more coming in the future.
Our last game features sheep to replace previous cows. Great Western Trail, New Zealand, comes from publisher Eggert Spiel by designer Alexander Pfister with art by Chris Quilliams.
Oh, where to begin?
What's Great Western Trail?
Oh God, Great Western Trail is one of my favorite Euro games. It's a big, meaty, heavy strategy game that employs deck building as a mechanism, and also traveling around in a circle, stopping at various locations, doing actions that will give you resources or make you spend resources to get various bonuses. Then you make cow deliveries, which are the cards in your hand. So you're trying to sculpt this perfect hand as you deliver this set of cows. And then based on how good that is, you'll get money and points, and then the cycle will continue, and you will tear your hair out trying to pass all the decisions and multitudinous diverging strategies. Oh, it's great. I love it. I really love Great Western Trail. It is genuinely one of my favorite games. This is a frequel.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Is that a word?
Well, okay, so here is the genealogy of Great Western Trail. So there was Great Western Trail, there was Great Western Trail Rails to the North, which is the expansion to Great Western Trail. Then there was Great Western Trail Second Edition.
Ooh.
In between that was the poker table mini promo. Let's not forget that. And there's some other promos as well. Then there was the Great Western Trail Second Edition. Then there was the Western Trail Rails to the North expansion Second Edition. And now there was Great Western Trail Argentina, which was a standalone Great Western Trail game. And this is Great Western Trail New Zealand, another standalone Great Western Trail game.
So the third big Great Western Trail.
Yeah, and I think we've reached the end now of the Great Western Trails until they announce something else. But there's nothing coming anymore in the foreseeable future.
I mean, it doesn't make sense. The name doesn't make sense anymore. It's like the Carphone Warehouse. It doesn't quite make sense any longer.
Yeah, so here's my sort of brief summary of everything that's happened so far. Great Western Trail, great. Rails to the North expansion, great for people who love Great Western Trail. Second edition, great. Same with the expansion. It's all good. If you never played Great Western Trail, but you think you would enjoy a medium to heavyweight Euro game with a little bit of luck, but also a lot of various diverging strategies, Great Western Trail is pretty good. That's my opinion.
Luck in the sense of card draws.
Yeah, luck in the sense of card draws, because the deck building element always provides a little bit of variance, you know? So it has a little bit of zing to it, right? Great Western Trail Argentina, we've reviewed in a previous episode of this podcast. You can check that out. And also Great Western Trail Second Edition, we reviewed in the Legacy episode somewhere, not that far down the list, so you can find our discussion on that. We didn't love Great Western Trail Argentina, and we kind of didn't even see the point of it, really, honestly.
No.
It was a weird departure that felt heavier and clunkier than the original, introducing some kind of quality of life adjustments to people who play this game a lot. I mean, a lot. More than us, as someone who likes it enthusiastically. Someone who is, plays it all the time.
I think we concluded it was something for the fans.
Yeah, but something for the fans. Again, I think it's something for a small percentage of the fans. Because I think most people who are fans of this game, let's face it, people play a board game 5, 10, 20 times at most. I don't think Argentina was for someone like that. I think it was for someone who played 100 games of Great Western Trail.
I think that's what we concluded. And how do you feel that New Zealand fits into this?
Weirdly. So I'm going to say straight up, I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. I think it's pretty good. Would I recommend it? Probably no. Which is a weird space to be in. You'll find out by the end of this, I guess, segment, whether it's for you or not. But it's not like a recommendation with bells on it. It's maybe like a cautious recommendation. Certainly, first of all, I'll say, if you've never played this, do not get Great Western Trail New Zealand. There is just no reason for you to do this. This is once again for the fans. But I think this time maybe it is for the fans like us who have played it 5 to 10 to 20 times rather than 100 times. Although there's probably something for those as well.
I really struggled with this game. I understand what you're saying. Like it is for someone who's played Great Western Trail a lot. But I don't know that the sort of base mechanisms that are the same as Great Western Trail are different enough to make this feel like a different game. It's all the add-on stuff that makes this feel like a new game or like a sequel game.
Yeah.
But it comes back to that time-old question. Just because you can do something, should you?
Oh, wow. Okay. So we have some diverging opinions here emerging. Yeah. You didn't get on with it as much as I did you?
No. And in fact, when we started playing it, I had to bow out after like an hour into it? Not even that.
Half an
maybe
hour.
Half an hour.
An hour.
My brain could not cope. I've played Great Western Trail. I love Great Western Trail. Like you, it's such a good game. And every time we play it, I have fun with it. But all the extra things, and the colours are very bright on the board. The artwork is very, I don't want to say messy. It's not messy. But there's bitty. There's stuff everywhere. There's loads of lovely artwork. But my brain just could not cope. What my brain wanted was like the tile to just say what it does, or the cards to just say what they do. I couldn't cope with all the colours and the extra bits. It was just confusing me. And the extra board was just something else that I had to think about that I just wasn't coping very well with. However, when we came back to it the next day, because I said, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. When we came back to it the next day, it was a lot better. I must have, I slept better or whatever. And it was fine. It was fine. I don't know that I would play this over the original Great Western Trail if I fancied a game of Great Western Trail, though.
And I think that sums up everything pretty well. I think for some people this will be, a cool twist on Great Western Trail. And for some people, it just won't. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening in this game. Like in the previous games, you are delivering cattle. This time, it's not cows, it's sheep. Sheep cattle? Let's say they are. And of course, not in America, in New Zealand. Although, let's put a pin in that. So the sheep are represented by cards that you have in your hand, and this is a deck building game. So you'll be drawing sheep and playing sheep. Oftentimes, you'll be playing sheep as you land on various action spots on the board. So you have this person, they travel around the board in a big circle until they reach Wellington, in which point they reset and start at the beginning of the board, and again, they travel through various locations. Now, you don't have to stop at every location. You skip the ones you don't want, but you have like a limit as to how far you can go. And then as the game progresses, players will build their own locations that will do unique things only for them, impeding others with financial penalties. Potentially, yeah. You kind of create more opportunities for yourself to do things, cooler things that are generally available on the board already in like a worse version, right? So, or maybe you will not build buildings. Maybe you'll pivot into collecting a lot of different sheep cards and just kind of maximizing your deck. Or there's a whole new shipping mechanism where you travel with a boat and build ports, and that replaces the rail system in Great Western Trail. It works quite differently, although the spirit of it is the same.
Very much similar, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just...
Yeah.
So that is one of the things that I kind of had the issue with, my brain had the issue with, because the rail system is quite... Once you understand what you need to be doing, it's quite simple to just, keep trying to do it. Whereas the system in New Zealand is a lot more all over the place.
It's very expanded. It is perhaps my least favorite part of the game. It is actually all the other things that make it more intriguing for me. These little changes that are not as evident, that kind of puts a twist on the formula. The whole expanded shipping system, it's very voluptuous. So the trick in this game is that you can now shear sheep instead of like just discarding them for various things. So whenever you reach Wellington, you want to have a hand of cards that is composed entirely out of different sheep, right? And that was true in previous games. You wanted different cows. And that would determine how much income you get because you add the values on those cards together, and also where you can put your scoring marker, which is this disc you take off that unlocks new abilities for you, but also scores you points at the end of the game. Now, that system it's much more complicated in Great Western Trail New Zealand, because now sheep don't just have a scoring value, they have a shear value as well. And there will be spots along the board where you can shear them and get money for their shearing.
But you have to discard that card, so you won't be taking that to the end.
Correct, right? But it also kind of functions in a similar way like delivering the sheep to Wellington.
Yes.
Because once again, there will be opportunities to put out a disc onto special sheep shearing scoring spaces rather than regular scoring spaces. And those are, there's some available on the board, but more reachable via the shipping track. If your ship went into the right places, you could unlock more scoring opportunities for shearing sheep. You don't have to. It's not a strategy you have to follow. But it kind of diversifies the game and asks you more questions.
You end up with the 2 tracks rather than just having the one rail track. You have one kind of track where you're delivering sheep and one where you're delivering wool, or you're selling wool that you've just got from shearing the sheep.
But also this boat shipping thing unlocks more spots for your regular deliveries or various bonuses. Now there's a whole new system of deck building cards, which actually I quite like. So one of the other big changes is that there are now much less opportunities to thin out your deck. Remove decks, remove bad cards from your deck permanently. You can't do that so much anymore. Your deck just balloons, right? There are a scant few opportunities, but they're very punitive and much harder to rely on.
Punitive?
Yeah. Because, so for example, you have these tokens that let you draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards, kind of, mitigate your luck and get maybe a better hand just before you deliver, right? So these tokens still exist. But now if you spend 2 of them, which is a lot, that's drawing 4 cards, discarding 4 cards, you could change your entire hand, basically. If you discard 2 of them, you can remove 1 card from the game forever. And I'm not sure that through the course of the game, that's worth it,
I did feel like those tokens that let you draw 1, discard 1 came up more than in previous Great Western Trails, though.
For you, maybe.
No.
I didn't get many of them,
okay.
I was guarding every one I had.
Well, you had all that sheep that I wanted, that Romney sheep. You kept getting the Romney sheep, and I just couldn't seem to get one. So I guess it was just the different ways that our games emerged.
It's true, but there are these deck building cards in addition to that, which when you draw, you can just get their effect and immediately discard them and draw a new one. And that's a nice addition because instead of your deck just getting smaller, you now kind of cycle through it faster. Yeah, and you find these little treats like that you put in there yourself earlier. It's like, oh yeah, I got that card earlier. It's nice. It feels good, So there are nice little moments like that, sort of peppered through the game. But overall, the game is much more punishing and stingier than it was before, right? And to me, who's enjoyed Great Western Trail in the past, it feels like, just a puzzle that asks more of you. It pushes you harder. It asks you to be a bit more ruthless with your decisions. It asks you to be more precise in what you're doing and more calculated. And a lot of the new elements work towards that, I think. But one of the ones that don't is this new shipping track, which feels like a whole third of the game, just extra bolted onto it.
Yeah, I enjoyed those little bits as well. Like cycling through your deck quicker, rather than having to make a decision about which card you're permanently removing from a game. You're just cycling through and like you said, getting those little bonuses like getting a certificate or getting a gold or whatever, and that's nice. Not a gold, sorry, a coin. And that's nice because that might help you decide what your next goals are going to be. And I think that led to some interesting decisions that I wouldn't have been able to make otherwise, right? It led me into different paths than I wouldn't have done otherwise because I knew if I had this card I could maybe then draw different sheep, right? And yeah, so I did like those sorts of things. I will say though, this game took me nearly an hour to set up.
Oh wow, that's long setup time. That's Voidfall setup time.
I think it was just me, but I know that was nearly an hour because I got through 2 episodes of the Twilight Zone while I was doing it.
Hey, maybe the Twilight Zone is the problem.
Maybe it was. But it took a long time and it spread all over the table. That's why it took so long, because I set stuff up, then went, this isn't going to fit. Okay, I'll move it this way. So it takes up the entire table, and our table is not small, right? But it's sprawling.
Returning to those more punishing bits, and I wanted to highlight an example of that. So in Great Western Trail previously, when you made a delivery, you got to take off a disc from your player board, unlocking a new ability, and then you put it on the scoring pile, and then that gives you money and gives you points at the end of the game. Great. Now, like the better spots genuinely just cost you a lot of money. Most of the money you just made just goes away to pay for things. And I think you'll know whether... So first of all, don't get this if you've not played Great Western Trail. But you'll know you'll like this if, A, you like Great Western Trail. And the sound of it being very much harder to execute, you know, very much harder to kind of manage your money and things just being tighter strategically, not mechanically, strategically, because it's not mechanically tighter. It's all over the place.
Did you ever find that you were lacking in money or
Yes,
sheep?
yes, many a time.
Yeah.
Many a time. I felt like I was struggling, and it was only towards the end that my strategy kind of blossomed.
But what is really nice is that if you are lacking in money, there are those sheep shearing spaces which will give you money. Right, so and that will also in the previous Great Western Trails, when you turned in your sheep, whatever was left in your hand you discarded.
Yeah.
In this one you don't. But like you said, you know, you can only turn in one of each type of sheep. They don't want multiple for whatever reason. They don't want multiples of the same type of sheep. So if you know that you've got a hand that's got similar sheep and it's the same sheep, you can shear them, get some money. And then, you know, or keep it in your hand, and then when you go back to the beginning, you know, use it for something else.
Or you can make shearing your whole strategy, like I did. You know, get a lot of shearers. So there's now 4 types of workers instead of 3. Again, diversifying the whole thing. You know, strategically. There's more ways to go about things, and there's more puzzles to consider. And for someone who's played, you know, a fair amount of Great Western Trail, not a lot, but a fair amount, I enjoyed this, and I respect why you didn't, because I felt like it was too much for you, wasn't it?
You said you also enjoyed the difference in the way the rounds are tracked.
Yes, I did.
Rather than being one board where you're taking the people off and blah blah blah, there are 2.
So I know that you didn't like it, right? Because for you immediately it's like, why isn't just this one board, right? Why is it now split up? So before you had all the workers and all these hazard tiles and stuff like that in one big clump, and it made the round tracker go down, 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 eventually until you bump it off. Every time you make a delivery to Wellington, you add tiles to this board. So now there's 2 boards. You add tiles to the worker board where there's just the 4 types of workers. And then there's these bonus tiles that push the round tracker down, actually, and they're sort of separated out. And the reason I like that is because at a glance, I was like, oh, okay, so these are the workers that are available. These are their prices. I can see that information and parse it much better rather than everything being in just one big clump. And also you can predict prices of workers, whereas before they fluctuated between, oh, workers are really expensive now, oh, they're really cheap. Now it's like, okay, there's a lot of that worker, they're cheap.
Yeah.
Easy, right?
Yeah, but I found the opposite. I found the opposite to be true, and I think that's why I didn't like it. I found it more difficult to figure out what was going on with the 2 boards than if there's just one board. And okay, the price varies, but it still does, you know, like because if there are more workers in this game, they're going to be cheaper. If there are fewer, they're going to be more expensive. Like, I don't know. It just didn't gel with me. And I think that was the whole thing about this game. It felt like I was continuously trying to... I think I said to you, it felt like there was an octopus and I was trying to like grab all his tentacles, you know,
at the same time.
Just couldn't. Yeah, at the same time, and just couldn't manage to do that. And I don't think that's a criticism of the game. And I think that if you enjoy, like you said, you know, if you enjoy having loads of different things to think about and having loads of different paths to go down, I think it will be a game that you will like. But But for me, it felt like all the things that were nicely contained in Great Western Trail had just been chucked out on the floor, like having 2 different tracks. I loved the sheep shearing. I thought that was great, that you could discard a sheep that you didn't necessarily want to turn in for money. That was super. And it made you plan your route of how you would, land on the sheep shearing space. And how you manage your buildings. Do you want to add another sheep shearing building, or do you want to go in a different direction? But having 2 different tracks for delivering sheep, delivering wool, and it just felt like everything was going off in various directions.
And there's that bird track as well.
The bird track.
There's a whole track that's just a track. Just go up the track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it will unlock certain things. It will unlock certain spaces that you cannot build on.
But it is just a track.
Until you have moved the bird up this number of spaces. And it will give you tiny bonuses as well. Like it will... I like the fact that there was the bonus on the bird track of you don't have to pay for hazards anymore. When you move through hazards. That was really useful.
That was a funky new addition, yeah. And so there's a lot of these like little quality of life improvements where it doesn't improve, and where I think it really buckles under the weight of all these added rules is the rulebook. Because Great Western Trail's rulebook was never like amazing, but it taught you the game, right? It certainly had its own style of how it wanted to teach it to you, and it followed that formatting in Great Western Trail, Argentina as well, and now in New Zealand. But there's just a lot more rules. And I feel like that format that they've established previously of how it teaches you the game does not support all this added craft. It just becomes too much. It's very bad for referencing. There's a glossary, but the glossary doesn't contain all the icons. It contains some information. So sometimes you're trying to look something up, and the rulebook is impossible when you're trying to scan for things. Like when you're trying to reference it, when you've already learned it. It's very bad at that. And the iconography is now more confusing and muddied. And I agree with you that there are just too many colors now. Like, I like Chris Williams' artwork.
Yes,
I think,
me too.
I think the 2nd edition of Great Western Trail looks beautiful. I think Argentina it's an okay looking game, right? But here it's too much.
Yeah, I also like Chris Williams' artwork, but there was just because the tiles are quite small to begin with that you place to build, and half of them is taken up by a picture that you can't really see because it's quite small, and then you only get the bottom bit that actually says what the tile does, and I found it very difficult to sort of glance at the board and know what was going on and know where I wanted to be. I was continually, because it's a sprawling game, I was continually standing up and like arching myself over the board to see what was going on. And it was not comfortable. It was not a comfortable play for that.
Okay, here's to wrap up, here's my verdict on it. I think it was a weird decision to do Great Western Trail Argentina and New Zealand as standalone games. Because from a marketing perspective, it's like, oh, hey, there's a new Great Western Trail game. So what you expect is, maybe a new twist, but not necessarily a much more complicated game. And if you're doing 2 of them, you expect one of them to maybe be a little lighter, one of them to be a little heavier, right? No, it was heavier and then heavier in some, right? And so that was a weird decision. I don't view these as standalone games. I view these as expansions to Great Western Trail who couldn't contain everything. Like, they had to print so many things, might as well print a new game.
They had to do sheep because you can't shear a cow.
Right. So you need a whole new board. You need
They could
sheep.
have done milking cows, though. You could have delivered milk.
I suppose. I don't know. This felt to me more like just an expansion that needed so many components that it was a whole new game.
You said this was to wrap up, but you also said earlier, let's put a pin in the New Zealand.
Well, yeah. Okay. So this is not coming from me. This is coming from people who are from New Zealand. Specifically, Jay from 3 Minute Board Games has commented about this a lot on social media, and some of the representation of New Zealand in this game is weird. This is not a new move for Alexander Pfister, who's got himself into many hot waters. including some voiced by us in the past. So there is that. But okay, I have one question to ask. Why do board games keep doing New Zealand dirty? What's wrong? What's happening? Why did pandemic exclude New Zealand from the world map? Everything else is on there. New Zealand, no, just forget about it, right? It doesn't exist. But it's weird. So the shipping track I mentioned, the second whole board where you ship, right? It looks like what is New Zealand, right? And a whole bunch of islands the size of New Zealand to the west of it, which in the real world don't exist. If you open up the Google Maps,
any other map,
or any other map, you will look to the west of New Zealand and you will find some water and then Australia eventually. But now there's these whole islands that you make deliveries to. You ship the sheep, which again, according to Jay from 3 Minute Board Games, who kindly informed me that New Zealand did not ship sheep to like a local network of trade routes because it never established those trade routes. It just shipped them to Australia, who then shipped it to Britain because...
Well, yeah. Okay.
Because...
Let's not talk about that.
Yeah, because Britain. But what's weird about that, right, is first of all, it represents New Zealand poorly because it invents something that didn't happen, right, and adds it. And then it invents these whole places that don't exist. And in somewhere in between there, they could have scored a good goal, right? They could have said, hey, we don't want to mimic, nasty history. We don't want to mimic colonialism. We want to present a New Zealand that had its own shipping network. Maybe that's good if you actually used the many islands that are somewhere near.
There's a lot of islands belonging to New Zealand.
But not like made up fictional ones, right? Like they almost had it. And as long as they put it in the rule book as well, that's what they're doing, that they're making this fictionalized version of New Zealand with these purposes, in which case you should probably have a good cultural consultant, to run that by. I don't think this exists, right? I don't think this exists in this game. So they almost had something there, but I think right now it just looks weird. And I think I've seen a lot of correspondences on social media from players from New Zealand who are a bit upset because it's like, what is this? This isn't New Zealand.
Yeah, it's nice to have a game about New Zealand, but represent New Zealand properly.
Yeah, correctly, right? So yeah, some weird choices there, and I think people should be aware.
That's all the games. If you have anything to say about any of them, don't forget to drop me an email, elaine@nopunincluded.com, or if you have any general questions or comments. Stephen has emailed to say, in your last podcast, there was a discussion on one of your listeners' comments about having lower quality friends than the SUSD crowd. While I think they've chosen the wrong term to make their point, the real lesson is in understanding the social dynamic in your regular play group.
Just want to correct that. It wasn't our listeners. People say this a lot on the internet. This is, if you go on Reddit or somewhere like that, this will be a sentiment that's echoed quite often and, frustratingly so. I mean, I don't see how these two things relate. Yes, it is important to understand the social dynamics of your play group. I've always been a very big advocate of that, actually. I think oftentimes people will say things like, oh, how do I teach this more complicated game to my friends when they're zoning out and they're spending time on their phone? I can't get them to play this more complicated game. That's your friends telling you they don't want to play the more complicated game. It's not their speed. Pick something lighter, And I'm not saying that to be disparaging. Like, really, really, I'm not. I'm saying this from the friendliest place possible because, this is part of being a good host and part of being, someone who wants to introduce people to board games is introducing people to the board games that they will enjoy. And it's a difficult thing. I know this. I've recently been introducing someone to board games, and I made mistakes in terms of picking the right themes, picking the right complexity. It's a trial and error process. But when your friends are not having a good time, that's them maybe not indirectly telling you they're not having a good time. Maybe because, the game isn't right, or, the mood isn't right, the atmosphere isn't right. Something is off, and forcing then that wrong game on them, it's not going to work. So yes, I agree. Understanding social dynamics of your group is very important. I don't understand how it relates to that comment. Maybe it's because of something I said in the past episode. I don't know. Anyway, I agree in broad terms, yes.
Finally, Efka, what is the game of the episode and what can people find in the bonus episode this time?
Oh, well, for me, it's Schadenfreude. I don't know about you.
Yeah, Schadenfreude.
Yeah? Well, we're once again in agreement. The game of the episode is Schadenfreude. And in the bonus episode for our Patreon subscribers, we have talk of 535, which is a neat little climbing shedding game, which is an offshoot of trick-taking. And also Fantasy Realms in relation as well to Bandito, which we discussed in a previous bonus episode. So tune in for that if you're a subscriber, and if you're not, consider it. It's cool. It supports us. And that's the end of the episode. And with that, why don't you say goodbye to poor representation of New Zealand?
Goodbye, poor representation of New Zealand.
Goodbye, poor representation of New Zealand.